Cubby always thought Casino Royale was an intriguing book and thought that it would make a good Bond film. It would be great if we could get the rights and do Casino Royale the right way.
When Michael and I decided to do Casino Royale, we knew we were taking a big step. We were making a big departure.
The entire period that Neil and I were involved with Barbara and Michael, from the first moment that we met them, we said we wanted to do Casino Royale. And at that time, it wasn't a possibility.
It's very difficult to say what's the right time for Casino Royale to be made. I think that if you're going to do it, you have to wipe the slates clean and start from the beginning.
The journey from Ian Fleming's authoring Casino Royale to the version of Casino Royale with Daniel Craig is one of the great odysseys in the history of motion pictures. It's a journey into hell and back, is what it is.
It is a story that is every bit as interesting as any James Bond film you've ever seen. Ian Fleming writes Casino Royale in 1952. It comes out in 1953.
In 1954, CBS does a version of Casino Royale
for their television show Climax.
My name is Linda Christian, and I was the first Bond girl. It was a difficult project because it was live.
This show is actually sort of an interesting presentation of James Bond. They get in what would have been the ultimate Bond girl of the day, Linda Christian.
She was so right as a Bond girl because she kind of lived the life of a Bond girl.
Possibly they chose me because of my languages. Maybe I was also photogenic. It helped.
So they have the perfect Bond girl. For a screenwriter for Casino Royale, they get Charles Bennett, who had written a number of the 1930s Alfred Hitchcock films.
They hire Peter Lorre to play the villain, Lashif. You wish that Peter Lorre had had a chance to play a Bond villain in one of the later films.
But they are missing one major element, and that is a British Secret Service agent named James Bond.
Oh, you're a legend, old boy. Cod Sense Jimmy Bond, they call you. I knew you right away.
I didn't know I had that much of a reputation.
But somehow Bond doesn't translate to American very well.
Television is not the right place for James Bond. James Bond is so much bigger than that, and it just ultimately doesn't work.
Well, 1954 is the year when Gregory Ratoff, a Hollywood actor and director and potential producer, acquires the rights to Casino Royale from Ian Fleming.
Gregory was starring in an extraordinarily bad movie that Fox was making at the time. And this was a thing Fox was making in Egypt with foreign money that they couldn't get out. The revolution had stopped anybody taking the money out, imagining that maybe they could get the money out via the movie, because the movie would make money, ha-ha. Everybody was stealing money from the movie like mad. And Gregory had, when the movie finally was finished, Gregory had 10,000 pounds, Egyptian pounds in cash. And he wanted to get them out of the country. And so he sewed them into his suit. The normal thing to do, I might say at that time, was to put in diamonds and things, buy diamonds. But Gregory knew that the person that sold you the diamonds would turn you in as well, and you'd be arrested at the airport, or the customs would take them. So Gregory, as I say, he was smarter. He got cash, and he sewed it into his suit. And he took an oath. He was always taking oaths. He got down on his knees in the Cairo airport and said, I can't do his accent well, but he said, I swear to God, I swear on the grave of my mother, that if I get through, if I'm not arrested here, I will buy the first book that I read a review of. He got through the customs, he had the money, he got on the airplane, got Time magazine, opened it, and there was a review of a book called Casino Royale. He was prepared to buy any book, but this book undoubtedly struck a particular chord with him because it was about gambling. And Gregory was a gambler. He was a terrible gambler. I mean, I've seen him with my own eyes, bet on red and black at the same time. So when he got to Athens, he stopped there, literally, wired London, and bought the book.
So at the height of the Cold War, the cinematic fate of James Bond rested in the hands of a Russian.
James Bond is the great work of fiction, you might say, about the Cold War. And here's a man who was born in Tsarist Russia and who actually fled the communist regime in the late teens, early 20s, and came to the United States. Along with many others in the Hollywood community, Ratoff was kind of cast adrift in the 1950s with the collapse of the studio system at the end of the 40s and early 1950s. And so Ratoff had to move in a direction where he was developing screenplays, acting as a producer, acting as a director. He couldn't really depend just on being a character actor anymore. Gregory Ratoff buys the rights to Casino Royale, and only to Casino Royale. In 1954, he gets a screenwriter, Lorenzo Semple.
Couldn't resist like anybody did. Greg would give you a ticket to somebody. Lorenzo, we go to Paris. I said, terrific. And so I'd go to Paris, and then we'd work on some project. Every once in a while, we'd be some hotel. And he'd say, you want some money, Lorenzo? Okay. And he'd get a big handful of cash, a very disorderly handful of francs or scudos or whatever the country we're in, or pounds, and stick them in my side pocket and say, there, go out, have fun, have fun. And that's the way I was getting paid. I enjoyed the book, but Gregory was worried that Bond was a ridiculous character. James Bond was an absurd character. And God, how? We got to make this plausible. And nobody could figure how. And Gregory was not a great one for plausibility in his life or in his writing. Bond was never going to be the James Bond we know and love.
The script is missing a key ingredient. There's no James Bond in it. What they put together was a screenplay called Casino Royale. The story, in many ways, seems to adhere to Fleming's book. Man faces off villainous Le Chiffre. He gambles against him. He wins. Le Chiffre kidnaps him, tortures our hero, strapping him naked to a chair and beating his private parts. Not something that was going to be easy to portray in a film in the 1950s.
The surprising thing to me is that they're kind of thinking along the lines of some sort of rather shady, mafia-inflected character.
The Bond part is actually an American gangster who's based on Lucky Luciano, who's called Lucky Fortunato in the script, who's sent by the American Secret Service, the CIA of some sort, over to battle against this communist agent at the gaming tables. So all of what makes James Bond interesting is gone from the script. It doesn't exist there.
Well, in the 1950s, there's no template of super spies or anything like that for them to work from, and they have no idea that that angle, the James Bond character, is what's going to be so successful a few years later.
In 1956, Gregory Ratoff is in need of money. And so he decides to sell 50% of the rights in Casino Royale to a partner, Charles K. Feldman.
Gregory was very close to this Charlie Feldman, a super agent of the time. Very powerful.
In his day, which lasted for a long time, 30s, 40s, 50s, and into the 60s, he was one of the most powerful agents and then producers in Hollywood, and everybody knew who Charlie Feldman was. He did have a lot of James Bond in him. He could be very charming. He could be very ruthless. He did like to live extravagantly. He was one of the last of those great sort of playboy agents, playboy producers in the golden age of Hollywood.
It looks like in the 1950s that Feldman is kind of helping out Gregory Ratoff. Ratoff is this desperate and desperately ill character, at least it seems from his correspondence, traveling around Europe and South America and other places, going from clinic to clinic. And all through the 50s, Feldman is advancing him small cash sums, really to keep Ratoff going.
After they had become partners, Gregory Ratoff ran into Gary Cooper in a restaurant in Paris, and they had lunch together. And Ratoff told Gary Cooper about Casino Royale, and Cooper became very excited about the notion of playing the James Bond figure. Then Ratoff lets Feldman back in Hollywood know about this, and Feldman is clearly absolutely appalled by this idea because Gary Cooper is way too old to play James Bond.
Charlie Feldman squelches the idea of Gary Cooper being involved, but what he does do is he reaches out to Ben Hecht, one of the great screenwriters of Hollywood. Ben Hecht comes on board as a favor, really, to Charlie Feldman, and Gregory Ratoff takes a look at the script that Radoff has written with Lorenzo Semple, reads the novel, and he says, hey, you know what we should do? We should set this in World War II in Estoril, Portugal, which is highly ironic since that's the exact location where Ian Fleming sort of had the inception of writing the spy novel, Dindal spy novels, Casino Royale. So they hammer out this treatment that's set during World War II. Again, James Bond's not in it. There's no character that we would identify as James Bond, or that if you read the books, you would identify as James Bond.
Gregory Ratoff actually was pretty active right at the end of his life. He dies in December 1960, but in his last couple years, he acted in several character parts in significant films. And in fact, in 1960, he directs a film, Oscar Wilde, a biopic that runs into an early kind of controversy because another film about Oscar Wilde, Trials of Oscar Wilde, comes out roughly at the same time, and the two kind of have to battle it out publicity-wise and in the marketplace. The Trials of Oscar Wilde, the rival picture to Gregory Ratoff's, was actually produced by Cubby Broccoli, who would eventually, of course, be the key producer in the James Bond series.
After Gregory Ratoff dies, his widow Maria is desperate for money, and she keeps trying to unload her half of the Casino Royale rights.
Feldman wants the whole package himself. He wants to own all the rights. And he's also, you know, an old Hollywood nice guy in a certain way. He wants to do right by Gregory Ratoff's widow. He doesn't want to be fleeced by her or anything like that. And eventually, he makes a pretty reasonable deal with her to pay her ultimately $75,000 for her half interest in Casino Royale,
which is more than 10 times what Ratoff paid for all of the rights. He also forgives a huge amount of debt that Ratoff owed Feldman. So Feldman has a lot invested in this project. He immediately tries to interest his friend, Howard Hawks, one of the great legendary Hollywood directors.
They had been working together since the early 1940s, and he had made Hawks a vast amount of money. And Hawks is still quite active in the 50s and early 1960s, and it's not at all surprising that Feldman thinks of attaching Howard Hawks to the James Bond project.
Hawks has some interest in the project, but they find out that Dr. No is being made. They actually get an early print of Dr. No and screen it, and Hawks decides he's not interested in competing with what has already been done on the subject.
So many ways, Howard Hawks was the right guy to direct a James Bond film because Howard Hawks lived the James Bond kind of life.
And From Russia with Love opens in England. The success is phenomenal. And suddenly, everybody wants a piece of the James Bond business.
I'd love to see the immediate reaction of Feldman to the Dr. No From Russia with Love hits in that first year. I've just got to believe that Feldman at first was interested in quickly, becoming a part of that series.
And here's where the rights problems with Casino Royale get very interesting. One of Charlie Feldman's employees in the early 1950s, a famous artist, was a young Hollywood figure named Albert R. Broccoli. Of course, Broccoli would be part of the team with Harry Saltzman that would produce those early Bond films.
Thunderball was a huge problem to Broccoli and Saltzman because Kevin McClory, in his suit against Ian Fleming, won the theatrical motion picture rights to Thunderball. So there's this period in the early 60s when Broccoli and Saltzman are facing not one, but two potentially competing James Bond films. Thunderball, which McClory then had the rights to do, and Casino Royale, which by that time Charles Feldman had the rights.
They figure they can weather one competing project, but they don't want to weather two.
Well, they don't think they can make a deal, at least initially they don't think they can make a deal with Kevin McClory because they know that Ian Fleming would be profoundly offended if they made a deal with him. And they've got the rights to the rest of the James Bond books, and they don't want Ian Fleming as their enemy at that point.
Well, Charlie Feldman understands this. Charlie Feldman also has his production deal at United Artists, the same place that Broccoli and Saltzman do. And Charlie Feldman says, it's great. I would love to do business with my friends Cubby and Harry, but I'm going to get my standard producing deal. I'm going to get 60 cents on the dollar for the money that comes into the studio. United Artists goes back to Broccoli and Saltzman and says, we'll split our 40 cents with you. You guys get 20 cents on the dollar. You guys get 20%. We'll just take 20% on this movie. Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman had no intention of doing a deal where they were only going to get 20 cents on the dollar. They were only going to get a third of the share that Charlie Feldman was going to get. Charlie Feldman tried to negotiate things out. Cubby and Harry tried to negotiate things out. And then Ian Fleming died.
So then they start negotiating with McClory as well as with Feldman, and they can reach an arrangement with McClory that they are unable to reach with Feldman, and so they go on and make Thunderball.
Charlie Feldman was not happy that he was not able to make a deal. He immediately went over to Columbia Pictures, was able to set up Casino Royale at Columbia Pictures and start working towards making that the next Bond film.
You know, with the breakdown in all these negotiations, by that time, the Bond series is such a big deal that to go toe-to-toe with one of the so-called official Bond films becomes more and more problematic.
Right after Goldfinger, I don't think it probably would have been the right time to do Casino Royale. It would have been very hard to have had Sean do the first story, having already done at the other films. Goldfinger ended up sort of being the blueprint for the cinematic series. From that point on, they became more and more thrilling and exciting.
1965, Charles K. Feldman puts together and produces What's New Pussycat.
It was chaotically produced, and yet it became a big hit. I think that experience enabled Feldman in an unfortunate way, which is to say that he used the same methods and raised to the nth degree in producing Casino Royale. That is, throwing writers at the script, having multiple directors, putting in all his clients into the cast, regardless of whether they were right for it. It worked once with What's New Pussycat, and there's no reason it wasn't going to work again.
Woody Allen was quoted as saying something along the lines of, Charlie Feldman doesn't want to make a James Bond film. He wants to make a film to end all the James Bond films. So there may have been some bitterness involved. The film does have its charms. The film has a lot of the ingredients you want from a Bond film. It has beautiful women. It has an amazing score. It has great sets. It just is missing one thing. It's missing James Bond. It's like the fate of Casino Royale. We're not going to have James Bond in this story.
How could you lose money on a James Bond movie in the mid-60s? And he managed to do that. And yet in some ways only himself to blame.
There's a sort of perfect coda is when they go to promote the film in Boston. They have a promotional screening with a radio station that is every bit as much of a disaster as the film itself.
The field representative from Columbia Pictures came to me and said, there is this movie coming out called Casino Royale, which we don't think is going to be very good, and we'd like to do a promotion with that film and WRKO. I said, terrific. I said, here's the deal. Why don't we have a spy screening? Everyone who shows up with dark glasses and a trench coat on will get into the screening free. I said, but let's do it. And so we started running promos on the air.
And here's this upstart top 40 radio station trying to take the market and just beginning and not knowing, who's out there, who's going to show up. And we found out pretty quickly.
I parked a couple blocks away from the theater and started walking towards the theater, and the crowd got larger and larger and larger and larger.
I think it was 13,000 people showed up for the Casino Royale screening.
As I was passing the alley behind it, there was a car that was over on its top and kids jumping all over it. If you want to hew to the old Gilbert and Sullivan line about making the punishment fit the crime, this was the perfect situation where you had a lousy movie that was complemented by what I am sure the folks at the SAC theaters and the folks at Columbia viewed as being a lousy promotion that smeared the name of the film even worse, because here all these unruly kids came out and caused a riot and lit the theater on fire and destroyed automobiles.
Looking back on it in retrospect, it's pretty funny. And it was a great promotion for us.
We had the most successful promotion in the history of radio, in my humble estimation.
The name of the book had been sullied. It was forever, it seemed, linked to this absurd 1967 film.
Charles Feldman died in 1968, a year after Casino Royale came out.
It's the last movie he ever made.
The rights for Casino Royale pass on to United Artists, which had the production deal with Feldman, and Columbia Pictures, which had made the film. And these two studios split the rights. Neither one could remake the film without the other. It seemed that Casino Royale was never going to be made. Certainly United Artists did not want to create any scenario where there could be a competing James Bond film. And for the Bond filmmakers, they had plenty of Ian Fleming novels left that they could go through and work on, plus the right to create new storylines if they so desired.
About the time that we cast Timothy Dalton, Dick Maybaum and I were working on the scripts and with Cubby and coming up with the stories. And we did write a story of Bond's origin. Where our origin story failed was that we were probably starting him off too young, someone in their early 20s. And it just didn't work as the character for James Bond. You have to introduce Bond as a veteran. Even though it's his first assignment as a 00, he still has to appear as a veteran. When Pierce Brosnan came on as Bond, I don't think we thought about doing Bond's first mission. We thought Pierce, considering his experience, he would just fit in and go in as a normal Bond story.
So Casino Royale was left in its sort of limbo there until 1997 and the reappearance of the man who kept Casino Royale from being made as an official Bond film in 1965. Kevin McClory did a deal with Sony Pictures that they all decided Sony could make its own series of James Bond films.
We finally settled that case. As part of the settlement, we acquired the film rights to Casino Royale in the year 2000. Later, Sony came in as a shareholder of MGM, and then they took on the rights to make the pictures.
It was ironic, I mean, even more ironic that it was Columbia that held the rights, and we ended up at Columbia making this film. I mean, that is sort of really, we've come full circle.
Pierce was a great Bond. He made 4 pictures. The last one, much more successful than the first 3, so he was on an upward curve. But I think from the point of view of Barbara and I and our writers, it was very hard to continue down that fantasy style of filmmaking. And we really had to reconceive Bond and take Casino Royale to do it.
Following Die Another Day, we sat down to make the next James Bond adventure, and we just became very frustrated because we felt that the series had gone in a direction of, Huber fantasy.
One of the ideas we had is taking Halle Berry's character, Jinx, and trying to do a spin-off.
The approach was completely different to Die Another Day.
It didn't have such scale as the Bond films. It didn't have to have an explosion every 15 minutes or something.
Make it very personal.
It's almost like, how can we do another Bond that's sort of a follow-on from Die Another Day and build on that when we've kind of really enjoyed writing a much more human scale story.
It was a good script, but for various reasons it didn't get made, but it meant that we'd already started travelling down that road when the idea of Casino Royale came up.
Working on the Jinx project, I guess opened up the idea that maybe doing an origin piece on Bond, how he started his first case, doing the Casino Royale story, would be something we'd find interesting.
Michael said, why don't we just do Casino Royale now? The minute he said that, it just totally made sense to me, and I said, yeah, that's what I want to do too.
When we were in Los Angeles waiting to meet with Halle Berry, because she was about to read the script for Jinx, Barbara and Michael both sort of said, get out your copy of Casino Royale and start reading it.
It was fantastic for us to be asked to do it, because that is the last Bond novel that can be made into a film.
Barbara and Michael and Martin and I sat down and discussed what they wanted to do with this character, and that was reinvent Bond. Take him back to his roots. There are constraints. There's a character, a really well-defined character. There's a series of 20 films that come before it. There's all the iconography, there's all the history, and there's the constraints of making the actual film. You need to have the exciting chase scene in the open, and you have producers who really know these characters really, really well. And yet they gave me great freedom. This is more the Bond that Fleming had in mind.
So it was a new beginning, and it was also a chance to put on screen what Fleming originally intended. Barbara and Michael are very bright on scripts, and they were the ones initially who said we have to think outside the box.
Every time I make a Bond film, I'm always thinking to myself, this could be the last Bond film. If we don't get it right, we could ruin it for the future. So I think every time we make a film, both Barbara and I take it that seriously, that if we screw it up, it's going to be the last Bond film. And nobody wants to be part of the last Bond film. Barbara and I are really delighted with the success of Casino Royale. It was a bit of a gamble in the opinion of many people, although I think we thought it was the best and certainly the only way to really take the series forward.
It probably worked out that it was exactly the right time. When Michael and I decided to do it, it was actually exactly the right time to do it. Had it not been done as the first film, I think this was the only other time it could really have been done. First time it had been done as a television play. The next time it was done as a spoof. I felt it was important to honor Ian Fleming and my father and everybody who came before and to really get it right. And I think we did.